The forest held its breath that morning. Mist curled like silver smoke between the pines, and the earth was still damp from a night rain that had kissed every leaf and stone. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker tapped slow, deliberate, like a man hammering nails into an empty coffin. A boy walked alone beneath the green canopy. His name was Eli, 12 years old, though the hunger in his eyes made him seem older. His boots had long since given up, the leather worn through at the toes, so that his skin touched the cold ground. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, sleeves rolled and frayed, and he carried a dented tin cup as if it were his most precious possession, which, in truth, it was. The path he took was no real path at all, just a thread of flattened grass where deer sometimes passed. He had learned to walk quietly, for the forest was generous only to those who did not scare it. Some days he found berries, some days he found nothing at all. It had been nearly a year since winter sickness took his parents quick and cruel, like a wind that blew one night and left him with no one by morning. The town kept him alive, but never close. Folks would give him day work and hand-me-down scraps, but their eyes slid away when he stood too near. They said, "Poor boy," the way some people say, "Poor soil," not with kindness, but with pity for something that will never grow. Eli did not cry about it anymore. He had learned that crying was just talking to the wind, and the wind never answered. That morning, as he bent to collect a handful of fallen twigs for his little shack's fire, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the woods, a low, guttural groan, like a man trying to hold his pain inside but failing. Eli froze, fingers tightening around the twigs. His first thought was to run. There were things in these woods you didn't want to see, and things in these woods that didn't want to see you. But the sound came again. Slowly, he followed it, slipping through the underbrush until the trees parted into a small hollow where the light was thin and green. That's where he saw him, a man, tall, even while slumped against the base of a tree. His skin was the deep copper of sunlit earth, his hair black as crow feathers, braided with bits of leather. His chest rose and fell shallowly, and dark blood soaked the fringes of his buckskin shirt. A bullet wound. Eli had seen enough hunting kills to recognize it. The man's eyes opened at the sound of Eli's step. They were sharp, dark, and full of something that made Eli's chest feel tight. Not fear, exactly. Not even anger. More like pride, worn thin by exhaustion. The man spoke, but it was not English. The words rolled low and musical, like stones turning in a river. Eli swallowed. He wanted to step back, to vanish into the trees, but instead he found himself kneeling. He pulled the tin cup from his belt, hurried to the little stream he'd crossed moments before, and returned with water, trembling at the brim. The man drank, slowly, eyes never leaving the boy's face. Eli tore a strip from the hem of his own shirt, the last clean part of it, and pressed it to the wound. The man flinched but did not pull away. Blood seeped through almost instantly. They stayed like that for a long moment, forest humming softly around them. When Eli finally leaned back, the man whispered something, perhaps thanks, perhaps a warning. Eli didn't understand, but he remembered something his mother once told him as she mended a neighbor's torn dress by lamplight. Kindness is never wasted, even if it scares you. The sun began to sink, its light thinning to copper. Eli stood, hesitating. Come back," he said softly, though he wasn't sure the man could understand. The man's eyes closed. Whether from trust or weakness, Eli couldn't tell. The walk back to his shack felt longer than usual. The shadows stretched high between the pines, and every sound, the cry of a night bird, the crack of a distant branch, seemed sharper inside. He lit a small fire and curled under his blanket of patched cloth, but sleep didn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's face, the heat of his skin under Eli's hands, the steady gaze that had met him even in pain. He wondered if the man would still be breathing. When the morning came, and for the first time in a long time, Eli felt the ache of wanting someone else to live. The morning came pale and quiet, the kind of light that looks cold even before you step outside. Eli woke with the weight of a thought still pressing on his chest, the man in the woods. He dressed quickly, pulling on his threadbare boots. Before leaving, he slipped to the back of the baker's shop. The old barrel where stale bread was tossed out had a single loaf left, hard enough to chip a tooth, but still bread. Eli tucked it under his arm and hurried toward the tree line. The forest felt different that day, as though it knew a secret and wanted to see what Eli would do with it. The damp leaves underfoot muffled his steps, and the air smelled of pine and distant rain. He found the man where he had left him, though the warrior's head now rested against the rough bark, eyes half-lidded, breaths shallow. Eli knelt without a word and held out the bread. The man took it, not with the hunger of a beggar, but with the dignity of one who accepts what is given, because refusing would be disrespectful. He tore small pieces, chewing slowly. Eli poured water from the tin cup again, this time when their eyes met. There was something softer in the man's gaze, not quite trust yet, but the memory of trust. After a long silence, the man spoke, his voice low and rough. "Go. Danger. White men come." The words were broken, as if they'd been pulled from a language that did not want to let them go. Eli frowned. He didn't understand much, but he caught enough to know the man was telling him to leave. Instead, he pulled the bandage away from the wound and began cleaning it with water. The man hissed in pain but stayed still. "You'll die out here," Eli murmured, though it was more to himself than to the man. The warrior said nothing, only closed his eyes again as Eli worked. Eli talked as he cleaned the wound, not about danger or the war between their peoples, but about little things. How the snow sounded under boots when the air was too cold to breathe deep. How his mother had once taught him to whistle to call their old dog home. How the town's church bell didn't ring right anymore after the big storm bent it sideways. He didn't know why he spoke these things. Maybe because the man listened without interrupting, and there was no one else in Eli's life who did that anymore. By afternoon, Eli knew he needed to fetch more supplies. In town he kept his head low. The general store smelled of tobacco and dust, while waiting for the shopkeep to fetch a sack of matches. Eli overheard two men near the counter. "Redskin spotted near the creek," one said, voice hard. "Best hope he keeps running. If not," a pause, the scrape of a chair, "we'll finish the job proper this time." Eli's stomach clenched. He left quickly, matches forgotten, and slipped back toward the forest. That night he returned to the hollow, carrying the old blanket from his shack. The man was shivering in the cooling air. Eli draped the blanket over him. For a long moment, the warrior simply stared, as if trying to decide whether this boy was real or some spirit sent to test him. Then he reached out, placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, firm, warm. It wasn't thanks, not exactly. It was something older, heavier. Recognition. Eli looked at him in the dim light. "I'll come back tomorrow, I promise." The man's eyes closed again, but the faintest breath of a nod answered him. Eli walked home through the forest's shadows, every branch above creaking like an old door. His promise felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried, heavier even than the grief that had lived in his chest since winter. But it was a weight he chose, a secret between him and the trees. The rain came before dawn. It began as a whisper against the leaves, then grew until the forest was filled with the sound of falling water, 1,000 tiny streams weaving through the branches and dripping into the moss. Eli pulled his coat tight as he hurried through the wet undergrowth. His boots sank into the softened ground, and the smell of damp earth rose like smoke around him. The hollow was darker that morning, the air heavy with the smell of wet pine. The warrior lay where Eli had left him, but his skin was pale under its bronze, his breath uneven. When Eli touched his forehead, heat burned against his palm. Fever. Eli's heart thudded. Fever could take a man as quick as a bullet if it went too high. He thought of his mother again, of the way she used to crush certain leaves into hot water when his father was sick. She'd called them healing tea. Eli slipped away to gather what he could, not knowing if these were the same plants, only remembering their shape and scent. He brewed them in his tin cup over a small fire, the steam curling like ghost breath into the cold air. When the warrior stirred, Eli lifted the cup to his lips. The man drank in small sips, eyes closed. "Stay," Eli whispered, though he didn't know if the man understood. The day stretched gray and wet. Eli stayed close, pulling together branches and pine boughs to make a rough lean-to above them. It wasn't much, but it kept the worst of the rain off. As the man slept, Eli spoke quietly, the kind of talking a boy does when there's no one to listen but the trees. He told him about the first time he'd tried fishing and how the hook had caught his own sleeve. About the winter the creek froze so hard you could walk across it like a bridge. About the time he thought he saw his mother's face in the window after she was gone, and how he'd stood outside in the snow, hoping she'd open the door. The warrior didn't answer, but his breathing grew steadier, as if Eli's voice was a rope he could hold onto in the dark. Night came fast under the storm clouds. Eli stayed, feeding the little fire, wrapping the blanket tighter around the man. The rain softened near dawn, and the forest grew still again. And then, a sound distant at first. A deep, steady thump. Eli froze. Listening, it came again, then again, like a heartbeat, but larger, older. The sound rolled through the trees. Not from one place, but from everywhere. Drums, shapes began to move in the mist. At first, just shadows between the trees. Then they became riders. Horses stepping silently over the wet ground, their coats glistening with rain. The riders came in twos and threes, until there were dozens, their long hair and beadwork swaying, faces painted in colors that seemed to glow in the gray light. Eli's breath caught. One dismounted, a tall man with hair streaked in silver, wrapped in a blanket of deep red. His eyes were sharp but calm, carrying a weight that made Eli want to stand straighter. He knelt beside the wounded warrior, spoke in a low rush of words Eli didn't understand. The man on the ground opened his eyes, replied faintly. Then the elder's gaze turned to Eli. "You saved him?" the elder asked, slow and careful in English. Eli swallowed and nodded. The elder studied him for a long moment. The forest seemed to hold its breath again. Finally, the elder extended a hand, not to shake, but to beckon. "Come," he said. Eli hesitated. He looked at the warrior, who gave the smallest nod, barely more than a blink. That was all it took. Eli stepped forward. The elder mounted his horse and reached down, pulling the boy up behind him. The warriors turned their horses toward the mist. Eli didn't look back at the hollow. He only felt the drum beats in his bones, pulling him toward something he couldn't yet name. The mist thinned as the riders moved deeper into the forest, and soon the trees opened to a wide valley. Eli had never seen so much life in one place. Teepees rose in a great half-circle, their painted hides glowing softly in the morning light. Thin lines of smoke climbed from fires. Horses grazed in the tall grass beyond the camp. Children ran between the shelters, their laughter mingling with the low murmur of voices. But what struck Eli most was the people. They were everywhere. Men, women, children, and as the riders entered, heads turned. He could feel their eyes on him, not with scorn or suspicion, but with a kind of measured curiosity, as if they were weighing something they could not yet speak aloud. The elder slowed his horse near the largest teepee at the center. Men stepped forward to lift the wounded warrior down gently and carry him inside. Eli slid from the horse, his boots landing soft in the damp grass. He felt small, not because of his size, but because the place seemed older than anything he had ever known, as if it had been here before. Time started counting. The elder gestured for him to follow. They stopped at a great fire pit, where wood had been stacked high, the flames reaching toward the sky. As evening came, the camp gathered. The warriors sat in a wide circle, their faces lit by the orange glow. Women moved among them, carrying bowls of steaming stew, passing them to guests first, then family. The air smelled of cooked meat and herbs, of earth after rain. When all were seated, the elder rose. His voice carried easily over the crackle of the fire. He spoke first in his own tongue, his words rolling and rising, the people listening intently. Then he turned his eyes toward Eli. "This boy," he said in careful English, "found our son when the forest would have taken him. He gave water, he gave bread, he gave his own cloth to stop the blood. No one told him to do this. He chose." Murmurs moved through the crowd, not of doubt, but of approval. The elder continued, "Among our people, saving a life binds you to that life. You become family, brother, son." He stepped closer, his shadow flickering over Eli's face. "You have no family, I think." Eli shook his head, the firelight blurring in his eyes. The elder lifted a blanket from his own shoulders, deep brown, lined with beadwork in the shapes of mountains and rivers, and draped it over Eli. The weight of it was warm and solid, like being held. "You are welcome among us," the elder said. Something broke loose inside Eli then, something that had been knotted since the day winter took his parents. Tears came before he could stop them, but they felt clean, like the rain that runs clear after washing the dust away. For the first time in so long, he did not feel like a boy surviving from one day to the next. He felt home. The wounded warrior, now sitting near the healer's lodge, caught Eli's gaze across the fire. He raised a hand, a small steady gesture that said more than words could carry. The night deepened. Sparks from the great fire drifted into the sky, rising toward the stars like tiny prayers. The drums began again, slow and sure, matching the beat of Eli's own heart. And in that moment, surrounded by 200 riders, by faces turned toward him in welcome, Eli knew something he had never truly believed before. You don't always find family in the place you were born. Sometimes family rides out of the mist to find you. Asterisk if this story found its way into your heart. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still makes ripples in this world. Tell me in the comments where in this wide, wild earth you're listening from, bait. And don't forget to subscribe. The fire is always warm here, and there are more stories waiting to be told.